I would like to talk to you about the power of choice. I've mentioned it a number of times on the podcast, but I really feel like it's actually worth giving itself its own space because for me, this has been the most powerful thing that I have learned is that I have a choice. And sometimes that choice might be to get angry. It might be to act out of frustration. It might be to, rock in the corner with snot bubbles. It might be to have a bath and just let myself bawl my eyes out. It might be that I go and sit in the sun and let like sit on a chair and let the sun soak into my face. It might be that I choose to say something. It might be that I choose not to say something. But knowing that I have a choice is life changing. And I think it's so very, very relevant if someone is dealing with a form of depression. So I am not talking about clinical depression here. I'm not talking about something that a doctor or psychotherapist or a counselor might need to help you with, but that kind of low level depression that we can sometimes feel in a bit of a moment. So I really feel, and I heard it. I can't. If I could remember who I heard it from, I would give them credit for it. But it may have been Dan Sullivan in his book, The Gap and the Gain. But when we feel like we don't have a choice, then we feel helpless, and helpless is what creates depression. And I think that knowing that we always have a choice, we might not always like our choices, or we might not like the consequence of choices. But when we know we have a choice, then we are so very powerful. So very powerful. Um, and I've got an example. I've got quite a few examples in my life where I've just stopped and I've told myself, right, Nikki, you have a choice. But I'll tell that story in just a second, actually, because something else just popped into my head. So when we are blaming somebody else for how we feel, positively or negatively, it we become then a little bit dependent on that person, especially if it's for a positive emotion. We become very dependent on that person to create our emotion. So then it makes sense that we might try and control that person. So I coach my clients on this quite a bit. If they're sort of saying, "Oh yeah, but my partner makes me really angry," or they do something that makes me really frustrated, or my kids annoy me, or my manager isn't doesn't appreciate my work. When we do that, when we put our emotions onto a circumstance and somebody else's behavior is a circumstance, another human being is your circumstance, your situation, when you attach how you feel to something that they've done, and we can't change or control them, especially if it's in the past, then it feels like we can't change or control how we feel. That's when we're helpless. And that's when we're in our emotional childhood state. So this is not a judgment exercise. I go there myself. But understanding that that's where you are, acknowledging that then helps you bring you out of it. So if you're attaching how you feel to somebody else, as an example, then it makes sense that you're going to try and control them, or they have to be happy in order for you to feel happy, or they need to change in order for your relationship to be better, or they need to do something or say something in order for you to feel appreciated or loved, or whatever the emotion is that you're trying to get. But then you're dependent and you're helpless, and that's a pretty shit place to be. So don't do that to yourself. Don't give away your power because there is nothing outside of you that can create an emotion inside of you. That power lies in your brain. So, what happens if we take the example of a partner? Let's say your partner says something that you perceive to be upsetting. So, the circumstances that they've said words. If you had been unconscious when they were saying those words, you wouldn't have had an emotional reaction to it because your brain wouldn't have interpreted it. So, what happens is our eyes see something, our ears hear something, and our brain is activated. And our brain says things like, they shouldn't have said that. He doesn't love me. She doesn't appreciate me. Yada, yada, yada. So actually, it's your brain that created that emotion. This is not a tool to beat yourself up further, especially if you're making yourself feel rubbish. But it is a way to go, this is the best fucking news ever. Because at a point when I can't control the person, I can always control my brain. You want your brain to be the problem because then your brain is also the solution. Now you have a choice. Now you get to change your mind. You can't change people. And oh my God, I wish I could create a pill that I could give to someone or a magic wand that I could wave and everybody do everything that we wanted all everyone to do. But it doesn't work that way. It doesn't fucking work that way. But when we take it on board that it's our brain that creates our emotions, our thoughts create our feelings. Now we've got something to work with. Now we can work with that brain and we can change our thoughts. We can change our mind. You can change who you are. Now you have a choice. Now you're powerful. So, one of the most powerful times that I've reminded myself, and there have been a couple, is I was experiencing jealousy. So my husband had a really lovely relationship with a female colleague. They were really good friends. My brain did not think this was good, and my brain created jealousy. I've been doing this work long enough to know that that was on me. I didn't blame them. It was just something that I had to work through. So my brain would give me thoughts and stories that made me feel jealous. And I worked through that. And a couple of months later, Johnny started to get a little bit distant. For a couple of weeks, he was a little bit withdrawn, a little bit distant, um, not really present with us as a family. And I could tell something was going on, but he just wasn't willing to talk about it. And one night, one of my coaching calls had been cancelled, and he's like, "Right, Nikki, I need to talk to you. I need you to sit down." And he was white. His face was white. He was visibly shaking. He could hardly stand up. He had to rest against the kitchen worktop. And he said, "I have something I have to tell you." Um, and he started to break down. His voice started to crack. He started to break down. He said, "I need you to sit down." So I sat down, and this is what went through my head at that moment. This is the point he tells me he's had an affair. This is the point where he tells me all of my fears that I had a couple of months ago were true. And and this is what he's because you could see he was very emotional. And then what I said to myself is, Nikki, you have a choice here. Whatever is about to come out of his mouth, you have a choice. And because I knew in that moment the only thing that I could control was me, I sat up a little bit straighter. I took a deep breath and I said to him, "What do you need to tell me?" What he actually then went on to tell me, I found very funny. He did not at the time. I found it very funny. So I will let him tell the story one day. Or maybe keep listening on the podcast. Maybe we'll talk about it on the podcast together. But it was not what my brain was freaking out that it was going to be. I'm just recording a podcast. He's just walked in. So I'm sorry for that little interruption. Um, but in that moment, what what my brain was perceiving to be was not what he then went on to tell me. And what he went on to tell me, I actually found really funny, which he was kind of a bit blown away by because he really did think that that was going to be the end of our relationship. But my point is, at that moment, because I knew I had no control over what was going to come out of his mouth, I had no control over what he was about to tell me. Because I knew I had absolute control over how I wanted to react, I handled it. It wasn't a problem. And when you realize you have the power of choice, I don't think there is any bigger gift than you can give yourself. And so when I think about my parents passing, I don't want my parents to pass away. Hopefully, I've got many, many healthy years with them. But I know that when they do, I have a choice of how I'll handle it. And that choice will be to grieve. When my dog passes, she follows me around the house everywhere. I'll have a choice, and that choice might look like to grieve. Now, there are some situations, shock, particularly where you don't have necessarily a choice about cognitive choice about how you deal with it. But once you go through that process and you get your consciousness back, you do have a choice. So I'm not really talking about trauma here. In fact, there's no really about it. I'm not talking about trauma. I'm talking about more kind of day to day events that happen in relationships, in the workplace. You know, when you're driving to work and you're sat in traffic, you have no control over when the traffic is going to move. But you do have a choice about how you deal with it while you're sat in your car. You have no choice over the weather, but you do have a choice about how you describe the weather and how you deal with it. You don't have a choice about how people perceive you, but you do have a choice about how you perceive yourself, how you talk to yourself, the relationship with you have with you. That is a choice. So please, 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 please don't give your power of choice away. Definitely don't give it away to someone that you don't like, someone that annoy like that just consider that that power lies with you. That power sits with you. And especially when it comes to our children. Our children can't control their own emotions. How the hell do we expect them to control ours? By they have to make me happy. They have to love me. They have to behave so that I get to be calm. They have to be happy so I can be happy. That's not true. You get to choose to be happy. You get to choose to be sad. I'm not telling you what your choice should be, but I am telling you, you have a choice. And it starts by reminding yourself, hey, Nikki, you have a choice. At this point in time, when you can't control what's about to happen outside of you, you can take a breath and put your shoulders back. You can remind yourself you can handle it, and you have a choice about how you respond. I really hope this helps you. I really want to give you the power of choice because I believe it is the most powerful thing that you have. Have the most beautiful week, and I'll speak to you all again next week. Bye bye.